I know my own heart, and I know men. I am not made like any other I have seen. I dare believe myself to be different from any others who exist.
Anne Lister's diaries, which would exceed 6,000 pages and over 5 million words, is one of the most important documents in lesbian history, even in British history, as noted by UNESCO in 2011. 1/6 of the text is written in code, crypthand, as Anne Lister called it. Here she's free to speak openly and honestly and unfiltered about her sexual conquests, her romantic relationship with other women, especially Anne Walker, and the way she feels about her own sexuality. In a time where the word lesbian didn't exist, in a society where women were not equal to men, and in a time where being gay could end up costing you your life. How important is Anne Lister to us today? What would she feel about her code now being broken? And if she were with us today, what would she feel about the collective picture we are painting of her as a lesbian woman? Those are just a few of the questions I'm trying to get answered during the course of this episode. You're listening to a podcast called Portrettpodden. My name is Mats Lassiangos, and I'll be the voice in your head for the next hour. In this episode, the real gentleman Jack, Anne Lister. Anne Lister's diaries, which would exceed 6,000 pages and over 5 million words, is one of the most important documents in lesbian history, even in British history, as noted by UNESCO in 2011. 1/6 of the text is written in code, crypthand, as Anne Lister called it. Here she's free to speak openly and honestly and unfiltered about her sexual conquests, her romantic relationship with other women, especially Anne Walker, and the way she feels about her own sexuality. In a time where the word lesbian didn't exist, in a society where women were not equal to men, and in a time where being gay could end up costing you your life. How important is Anne Lister to us today? What would she feel about her code now being broken? And if she were with us today, what would she feel about the collective picture we are painting of her as a lesbian woman? Those are just a few of the questions I'm trying to get answered during the course of this episode. You're listening to a podcast called Portrettpodden. My name is Mats Lassiangos, and I'll be the voice in your head for the next hour. In this episode, the real gentleman Jack, Anne Lister.
Confidence that she's given women today, especially lesbian women, to be themselves is just remarkable. You know, I keep saying remarkable. Just an amazing legacy to have.
Angela Clare is curator at the Calderdale Museum Service in Yorkshire, and one of the houses that she cares for is Shibden Hall, Anne Lister's family home, which this year is 600 years old.
I started at Shibden about 7 years ago. And I hadn't heard of Anne Lister, I'm afraid, at the time. Despite living locally for many years, working in museums, I'd say I'm a women's historian. I did my master's in women's history. Never heard of her. So when I started, I thought, oh, this is interesting. So when I started, one of the first things I did was an interview with Helena.
Helena Whitbread was a woman who decoded the diaries and shared this important part of Anne Lister's life with the rest of the world. We have a lot to thank Helena for Anne Lister being the lesbian icon she is today.
We filmed about an hour and a bit's worth of interview and edited it down. That interview is online. I was sat behind the camera asking the questions and just with my jaw on the floor hearing about this amazing woman and all that she got up to.
Anne Lister was not only a landowner, She owned a mine. She dabbled in politics. She challenged both social and gender norms, and she was an adventurer. She was the first person ever to climb Mount Perdu in the French Pyrenees. But what she is mostly known for today is her diary, of course. 6,000 pages and more than 5 million words. To read it all, to understand it all, would be to read 50 novels in one go and be expected to remember what happens in the very first chapter.
So what we rely on is these specialists like Helena who have actually read them. And again, you also have to think about they've read them from a very particular angle. And I'm interested in how she changed the Hall. So that's kind of my slightly different angle again.
How closely linked are Halifax and Anne Lister? How do the local people of Yorkshire regard her today?
She's known locally. You know, she's always been a character of Halifax. I mean, Halifax is quite a quirky place. She is remarkable, and her legacy and her impact today is remarkable. Yeah. But again, unfortunately, she didn't publish anything.
No.
And at the time, she would have been known, but she wasn't really. You know, she didn't really leave anything kind of charitably, or she didn't sort of start anything. She was involved in politics at the time and obviously ran her business managing the Hall and the estate. But yeah, because she died too young, we'll never really know what she would have gone on to do. So I like to think that she would have published and done more philanthropy and been more involved in, you know, possibly helping other women in some way. Whereas, again, she was cut short. She was still just off travelling and living her own life. But had she lived, again, I really think she would have shared more of her travel journals and possibly done something with her diaries. But we'll just never know, which is a shame. So she's known in certain spheres. And I think, again, obviously, anybody studying diaries and women's history, anybody studying landed gentry and women who had estates and managed them, she's up there, but still within a very small circle, unfortunately. And then Gentleman Jack came along, so now everybody knows her.
Yeah.
However far away my sister goes, however long she's gone for, she always manages to become the topic of any given conversation.
I didn't know Miss Lister was back.
Oh, very much so, ma'am.
Well.
Miss Lister. Miss Walker.
All she needs to do now is realise what she feels for me is love.
I want you to be happy above all things.
2019 saw the series Gentleman Jack roll onto our screens, on BBC in the UK and on HBO in the US. The series, created by Sally Wainwright and with Anne Lister played by the brilliant actress Suranne Jones, introduced a vastly greater audience to this fascinating and amazing woman. Roughly 6 million people watched every episode, and in the not-too-distant future we'll have Series 2. But did you know that most of the scenes in the show is shot on location at Shipton Hall?
Loads of it is filmed at Shipton Hall.
Okay.
So, yeah, the only thing they couldn't film at Shipton Hall was her bedroom. So that was the bit, they built that, they replicated it exactly in a studio down the road in Leeds. But everything else, so all of the hall, the exteriors, the parklands, all of it is actually at Shipton Hall, which is amazing.
Yeah.
It is true, it's on site, and it's the original building and furniture. And, you know, when you see her striding through the barn, that's the barn. So I think it's wonderful for, especially the actors in it, especially Suranne.
Yeah.
You know, she's in the house where she lived, and I think that must be amazing to have that opportunity. We visited the set of the bedroom in Leeds, and it was really, it messed with your mind because you went through a plain wooden door and you're then in the corridor at Shibden and you walk along and it's just, it was really weird. So other than the bedroom, everything that's Shibden is Shibden. Yeah. So yeah, that's really nice. And again, that's wonderful for the hall because we're worried that they might reproduce it all somewhere else for ease of filming, which kind of loses a bit of it, I think. But because nearly every scene is filmed there in Shibden, then it means when you visit, you are on the film set as well. Yeah. So for the hall, it's brilliant because it means people can visit, and again, that will ensure its longevity as well. Whereas if it had all been filmed somewhere else and made to look a bit different, I don't think people would be as worried, not as worried, as keen perhaps to visit the actual location.
Yeah.
Or they'd be there going, oh, this is completely different to the film set. And then it's the question of which is true. Is it is the film set an interpretation, or is it, could that be more real than perhaps the hall? Because after Anne died, you've got 2 other entire families and generations living there before it becomes a museum. So we can make guesses, and the diaries do give us information about the furniture and what things would have looked like. But some things we just don't know. No. And people didn't, even in her intricate diaries, unfortunately, she didn't leave us floor plans or like drawings of the rooms and what was in them. So, for somebody so meticulous, it would have been nice if she could have done, recorded exactly what was where and things. But as the diaries are transcribed, we are finding out more, the things are coming out that we didn't know. So hopefully, people share with us bits of information that we can include in the hall. And again, references, most of the furniture would have been there when Anne was there, but it would be nice to know for sure. We've got 600 years, so it is eclectic, but we are currently, the hall is mainly focused what it would have been like that sort of period, sort of 1830s, 1840s. Still got horse-drawn carriages, but you've got trains coming in, you've got canals, you've got industry, you've got steam power. It's a super exciting period. So in a way, it is more relatable. But then for women's history, it's still archaic 200 years ago with no rights. And again, and also for LGBTQ history, it's almost like it didn't exist. No. It's so unfair. That again, the assumptions and again, the historians, unfortunately, were very much from the heterosexual male canon for a long time. But this is such an exciting time now to be exploring these stories. And like I say, this has been known about locally for a long, long time. But unfortunately, you had the cloud of not being able to talk about homosexuality in this country, legally. You couldn't talk about it in schools. No wonder it's been so hard for people to talk about these stories. No. And even women's history is so marginalised. And we're still trying to find these examples. And that's where Anne Lister's fab, because not only is she a woman, but she's also gay. Yeah. And I always say we like it that she's definitely gay. Because often what you do is you think, looking back at gay men and gay women, we're pretty certain they were, but we still are making assumptions. Yeah. And also we're imposing on them that they may not have ever wanted anybody to know. Whereas Anne Lister, she's definitely gay because she's written all about it. Yeah. The evidence is clear. But again, I still feel a bit guilty because she wasn't out in any sense of the word that we would be today. So I dread to think what she's... But I hope that the flip side of that is, we've had people turning up at the hall and coming out. Yeah. And it's just like amazing that people suddenly feel like they can. Because if Anne Lister did it 200 years ago, then, and again, it wasn't easy for her. She was abused, she was insulted, she had a tough time of it. And Anne Walker really struggled with her gender and sexuality and being herself. But they modelled on and they got to be together, which is just amazing. Yeah. So hopefully Anne Lister won't mind the fact that we shout about her. And I think, there's a lot of facets to her, but I think her sexuality and her lesbianism is central. We all have that same desire, and 200 years ago it was so tough to be female, let alone queer.
Working at Shibden Hall and the success of Gentleman Jack and thirst of knowledge for Anne Lister, do you feel a responsibility to in want of a better phrase, carry on the legacy of Anne Lister? Oh,
totally. Yeah. When I started, like I say, the fact that I hadn't heard of her, I was kicking myself. And again, straight away we looked at the diaries, we shared, we did a new interactive thing so that we could share them more. Did the interview with Helena. I did the Anne Lister of Shibden Hall introductory guidebook because we didn't have a specific Anne Lister book. at the time. So we published that in 2019, before the series came out, again, just to kind of catalogue what we had and what we knew. And and there's, like, we did Anne Lister events. We did a conference back in 2014 about Anne Lister. So you feel the responsibility to share these stories and as truthfully as you can. And with Anne Lister, there was a lot of myths and legends around. And now there's a whole new bunch of myths and legends, which again, you have to be careful about. And because, as I say, there's so few people that have really read the diaries, you do have to check a lot. But the responsibility is there. And again, it's also that responsibility for the truth of it. And also, reminded that we have so little of Anne's possessions. Whilst the diaries are so vast, we've only got half a dozen things that were actually hers. People didn't keep possessions, especially not clothing and things like we do today. And all her library was sold off and has disappeared. But what we do have is the hall. And although it's probably changed a little bit since she was there, a lot of her legacy, to me, is kind of wrapped up in that building and those rooms that she lived in.
Anne Lister became sole owner of Shibden Hall after the death of her aunt. She commissioned York architect John Harper and landscape gardener Samuel Gray in 1830 to make extensive improvements to the house and grounds. A Gothic tower was added to the building for use as a library, and the major features of the park created, including terraced gardens, rock gardens, cascades, and a boating lake. After Anne Lister's death in 1840 in the Caucasus, the estate passed to her partner Anne Walker, who died in 1854. Possession then returned to the Lister family, who donated it to the Halifax Council in 1933, which in the next year opened it as a museum.
There's very different assets to it, and I think with Halifax, the whole town is kind of part of her life and things that she explains and explores. And the whole, the big features of it, the lake, she built that.
Yeah.
And the gatehouse, that was her. The two wings, that was her. She's the big Lister carved lion that you see, that was her. She really did make a difference on the whole. And once you realise how much of it is hers, it's very easy to see it's her home, it's what she did. And her legacy, if she'd have lived and published and done more, she probably would have transformed it and made it twice the size.
Yeah.
And so it would have been epic. So it's kind of sad in a way. But at least we've still got it captured, because at any time during the last 100 odd years that it's been a museum, it could have folded, could have been handed over, could have become a pub or a hotel. And then it just wouldn't really have been the same.
No.
She may have just been lost as a bit of a local legend. There was some woman that lived at Shibden at some point. It just takes a few different things to have happened, like the last resident leaving it as a museum. It's interesting how the stories all sort of panned out. And then there was me trying to do what I can with very little time and budget. And I was giving talks at different conferences and kind of events and trying to sort of shout about her. And then the next thing you know, Sally Wainwright's in the kitchen at Shibden saying she's going to do a TV series.
Not only did Sally Wainwright enjoy great success with her show Gentleman Jack, but in 2019 the novel The Moss House was released, a fictitious retelling of Anne Lister's life written by Clara Barley, real name Angela Clare. And though I've sadly not had the opportunity to read the entire novel, the parts I've read are amazing. And the portrayal of the relationship between Anne Lister and Anne Walker, it's intense. Just listen to this one review. Damn, Clara Barley did not hold back. Historical romance with all the tags. It's not PG.
That was my way of sharing an amazingly vast story, but getting it out there to people. Because, I thought, well, I can either leave this job and spend 4 or 6 years doing a PhD, but then write a very academic kind of account of a certain aspect of a personality. Or I can take all the really juicy details and write a novel, which is what I did. And again, it's another way in for a lot of people people who are reading it that have watched the TV series, but also people who just, that aren't necessarily interested in the TV series, but love a good, a page-turning novel and coming at it from that direction. But it's just hooking people. And I think the hook for a lot of people, especially for lesbian women, is just the fact that she was gay 200 years ago and had relationships, and it's really tragic, unfortunately. But had that confidence to dress a bit differently and be herself. And she means something to different people. And again, that's where I think just having a story of somebody who was really confident in their, especially in their sexuality 200 years ago, is amazing. I think there was a lot of people, especially in the LGBTQ community, waiting for Anne Lister. She's come out literally at the right time.
If you're like me, you love Gentleman Jack, and you've watched every single episode more than once. But I urge you, watch the entire series one more time, and look out for when Mrs. Watson makes an appearance. That is none other than Angela Clare.
I mean, who knows what will happen in 100 years' time. But for now, it's kind of like, I can drop the mic now because, I've seen it through. It's fine. So it's wonderful to see, again, that physical legacy of the whole, and just to know that that's going to outlive us all now. And be that place. I mean, it's almost, it is a real kind of place, it's, people are going on pilgrimages to Shibden Hall. And, people arrive and then just cry. Like, I'm here. And that's what it means to people. And it's amazing. I mean, we're laughing, but it's wonderful. And to have seen that happen from working somewhere that nobody's heard of to working somewhere that's known in so many places.
You are listening to Portrettpodden with your host, Mats Laseros. This episode, all about the fascinating life of Anne Lister, is part of a podcast called Portrettpodden. If you're enjoying what you're hearing and you want to hear more, I urge you to subscribe to Portrettpodden wherever you're listening to podcasts. And if you want to support this podcast, you can do so in two ways. You can share this episode with your friends, family, anyone you know who would be interested in Anne Lister. And two, you can buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/Portrettpodden. That's buymeacoffee.com/PORTRETTPODDEN. You can give one single donation or a monthly subscription. If you do so, you'll get a few rewards that aren't available to anyone else. Every single donation will be greatly appreciated, and it will help me take this podcast to new heights and offer you, dear listener, new exciting guests and stories in the years to come. That's buymeacoffee.com/PORTRETTPODDEN. The link will be in the description of this episode. Thank you so much for listening. And now, back to Anne Lister.
What they said of Byron, the poet, that he was mad, bad, and dangerous to know. Yeah. And I think that could have been said about Anne Lister.
Helena Whitbread is the woman we have to thank for Anne Lister being the lesbian icon she is considered today. It was thanks to Whitbread's meticulous work that her diaries were decoded and the world got to learn about this important part of Anne Lister's life, which for so many years have been hidden away and practically forgotten.
Huge challenge. There were 24 volumes, 7,700 pages and over 5 million words.
The diary, for which Anne Lister is mostly known, were almost never discovered. She had hid them in a panel in the wall, and it wasn't until the 1930s that a descendant from Lister found them and had parts of it decoded. Realizing what these diaries entailed, and fearing a scandal, he hid them again. And it wasn't until the 80s that Helena Whitbread started the meticulous work of decoding the entire diary.
They weren't all in code, of course, but then she had what she called her plain hand, that she wrote the journals in as we would in our normal, language, etc. But she also had the crypt hand, as she called it. So there were two forms of text. There was the plain hand and the crypt hand.
It's in the crypt hand section, the coded portions of this diary, where Anne Lister is free to talk openly about her emotions and her longings, her attraction towards other women, her sexual conquests, her love of Anne Walker, and more. This coded section makes up roughly 1/6 of the entire diary, and the code is a combination of algebra and the Greek alphabet. One extra layer to this code is that she often uses metaphors and euphemisms to describe what she really thinks and feels.
And then there were abbreviations. She abbreviated nearly every other word in the plain hand, and there were symbols in the journal meaning different things. My cousin came, but she meant that it was her monthly period, menstruation.
Okay.
And at first I thought, well, she hasn't got any cousins. But then I began to realise that she was talking about her monthly cycle. She might say, I'm going to my uncle. And that's what she called the toilet, going to the toilet. I'll just going to my uncle. She used the word kiss to indicate that she had a sexual experience with another woman. That she meant intimacy and obviously orgasm, yeah? And incurring a cross. And that would mean a little sign in the margin, incurred a cross, and that was masturbation. And she was on her own, yeah. Mm-hmm. Going to Italy was her phrase for having full sexual experience with a woman. You can see what I was into when I was trying to fathom out all these things. What are these signs? What are these symbols? What are these euphemisms? As well as decoding all the coded passages. It took me 5 years to get through the journals. Thankfully, a lot of it dropped off later in life when she became a businesswoman. She was into, building coal mines and monthly and stuff. A lot of the mystery had gone out of it by then. So at the end of 5 years, I had enough material for the 2 books. Mm-hmm. I Know My Own Heart and No Priest But Love.
It's fascinating to think about that its whole story started with Helena wanting to write a paper about Anne Lister's letters. What she discovered would change the world. Gradually, by painstakingly decoding each and every word of Anne's crypt hand, Helena discovered the truth of Anne's lesbian sexuality, as well as Anne's views on men, money, business, and the society in which she lived. Anne, it turned out, captured in her diaries a journey of self-discovery and self-definition that was previously unheard of for a woman of her time. The word lesbian did not exist. Therefore, she was left to introspect and come to terms with her identity, which she did in the most impressive way. Helena quickly realized that this story was important. By publishing the first volume of Anne's journals in 1988, then entitled I Know My Own Heart, Helena Whitbread made lesbian history. Such detailed and candid expression of lesbian love and sex that took place over 200 years ago was an absolute revelation. The lesbian world owes a great deal to Helena Whitbread for her ongoing committed study of the life and diaries of Anne Lister. Do we know why she started writing in code? So, what was the reason why she felt that she had to hide certain parts of her stories?
Well, of course, lesbianism wasn't known in those days. wasn't spoken about. But I really don't feel she could have written about it. In her own, without disguising it in some way. Why did she why did she feel she had to record every love affair, every act, every sexual act? It wasn't only secretive about sex. She was secretive about her clothes. She was secretive about her money. She would put all that in code. And also if she was saying something, quite nasty about people, she would put that in code as well. So anything she wanted to hide at all would go into the code. I think it was, I don't know. why would we write in code, really? Obviously, because we had something to hide. And that's what she had to hide, her sexuality, basically.
Yeah.
Even though she lived her outward life, she had what we call overt signs, outward signs that, look, I'm not like other women.
I love and only love the fairer sex, and thus beloved by them in turn. My heart revolts from any other love than theirs.
It was obvious that she was a lesbian, but more surprisingly, she managed to live her life as a lesbian in an era when there was no recognition of lesbianism or any support structures or any, I mean, today it's much more, what shall I say, you can find your own community today, can't you? And she did very well, but it was on a one-by-one basis.
Yeah.
She would have a series of lovers. Yeah. It's surprising how many people fell for her, Yeah. Even though perhaps they may not have been lesbian themselves, she would seduce them. Yes.
Why not?
Right.
With your work on these diaries, like you said, it took you 5 years. What's been the most challenging aspect in the decoding process and gathering this information?
Well, as I say, the challenges lay in what I've said about the pages, how much there was to go through. I was working at the time as a teacher, and so I used to go down to the archives every week and collect 50 pages, and that would be my spare time job, as it were, to do that. I suppose the research that it wasn't too bad when I was doing the first book, because it was based centrally in Halifax. But when I got to the second book, I had to travel to Paris, to research there, and I have difficulty with the language. Yeah. So I took a friend with me who'd been brought up in Paris. She was a French woman. So I suppose the challenging bit was travelling around to all the different places. I don't drive, so I always had to have a companion or my daughter or, to take me. So there were challenges while I was sat at my desk on my own doing it because of all what I've told you about the euphemisms and the crosses and the symbols. But there were also challenges about doing empirical research, if you like, going to where she lived, where she was brought up as a child. And, it was quite a journey over 5 years.
Yeah. With Anne Lister living in Shiddenhall in Halifax, with yourself being from Halifax, did you ever feel you had more of a personal connection to her?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, my father used to take us there as children, but we never got into the hall, and I didn't know about Anne Lister as a child. And then as I grew up, I realised that the Lister family was sort of very important in the history of the town. I'd been born and brought up in Halifax, so every street that I'd walked on, Anne Lister had walked on.
Yeah.
Well, when you come from a small town, and as you grow up in it, you feel it's dull and boring, and you want to go away. But once I found Anne Lister, the town changed for me. It became very romantic because, Anne Lister had walked up this street, or Anne Lister had visited that house, and suddenly the whole atmosphere and the whole aura of my own hometown changed completely for me.
Yeah.
So that was quite an experience.
I'd imagine learning about historical figures who might be shrouded in mystery. Let's say, what has been the biggest misconception that you've had to debunk?
I think the biggest myth or misconception about that I had to debunk was that the demonization of Anne Lister. People demonized her as a sort of a predatory lesbian who destroyed the lives of the women she seduced. They thought that the mothers of young daughters in Halifax would just say, "Oh, it's no great thing to be seen with Miss Lister. You must keep away from Miss Lister." Because, of course, older generations had sussed her out. that the young girls would be flattered. The difficulty was that because the Lister family was so high ranking in the town, it was considered a compliment if Miss Lister called on you, you see, but not so much of a compliment if she'd come to your doors. So, yeah. So then, of course, after her death, there was absolutely no knowledge of her as a lesbian. And it's only when the last Lister that lived at Shibden Hall, when he and his friend Arthur Beryl found the key to the code, and when they unlocked it and read what she'd written, they were horrified. And Arthur Beryl said, "We've got to burn the journals." But luckily for us, John Lister was an antiquarian, and he said no. He said it's this is a valuable document, but he hid it behind some holes in the wall. And after his death, Shibden Hall was given over to the Halifax Council, and when they went in to categorise all the material, the papers and that, they found these journals, and of course, but then they were locked away in the safe in the library, chief librarian, and nobody was going to speak about it, you see. But then when my work came out and the truth was known that the coded sections were her sex life as a lesbian, people began to read it.
Helena was perfect back in the 80s.
Angelica.
For her to have the confidence to say, no, I'm going to publish all the juicy details is just, again, even she, you know, she deserves medals for being brave. Because if you think back in the 88, you know, especially when the government told you couldn't promote homosexuality, and there she is publishing a book all about it.
A lot of people said that she was predatory, because she preyed on women, that sort of thing. But the point is, she didn't really, you know, they were all intrigued by her, and yeah, okay, she fell into bed with her, but she said she never forced anyone or anything like that. But because her first lover, Eliza Rain, was eventually went mad, shall we say, for that want of a better word. She had terrific emotional problems and mental problems, so she was classed as a lunatic. And of course, then her last lover, Anne Walker, also. Well, the myths arise, you see, that Anne Lister has these women and they all end up in lunatic asylums. So that it was that really that what they said of Byron, the poet, that he was mad, bad, and dangerous to know. Yeah. And I think that could have been said about Anne Lister.
What does it then mean for a town like Halifax to have such an icon?
It's wonderful, but it also amuses me, you know, because at one time you hadn't to mention a name, you know, nobody had to know. The journals were kept under lock and key, and only a certain group of elite people in Halifax, you know, like the librarians or the Halifax Antiquarian Society. But I don't think even many of the Halifax Antiquarian Society would know what was in the code. So when my first book came out, there was an enormous amount of interest. Thankfully, none of it hostile, because I thought that somehow or other that I would be accused of blemishing this family. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's a skeleton in the cupboard, if you like, as we say. I don't know whether you have a similar phrase. Yeah. And somebody's got a big secret that they don't want anyone to know. And I'd unlocked the cupboard, you know, and brought her out of it. And I always remember that the year my book came out, 1988, my first book, there was a Clause 28 passed by the government.
Clause 28 was a British law that prohibited the promotion of homosexuality by local authorities. Introduced by Margaret Thatcher's Conservative government, it was in effect from 1988 to 2003. It caused many organizations such as lesbian, gay and bisexual student support groups to close or limit their activities or self-censor.
And here was I, as a teacher in a Catholic school, bringing out a book on lesbian sexuality, you see. So I thought I'd better go and see my headmaster before he booted me out. But I said to him, look, I'm afraid that there's a book coming out this week that I've written, and it's about lesbian sexuality. And in the view of Clause 28, I can see it would be difficult for you. And he said that he was very, very good. And he just said, if you have any trouble with parents, but staff or students, send them to me. You know. So I thought, oh, and then just like that, and then gave him a copy, of course. And then he said to me later, he said, you've lit a slow fuse with this book. And I thought, what does he mean? But now, slow fuse is like a big bonfire now, but it's taken 40 years nearly.
Looking at the Gentleman Jack series and the vast popularity of Anne Lister in recent years, do you ever think back and say, oh, what if I didn't decide to write that research paper? What then?
Yes, I don't think all this would have happened.
No.
I really don't. No. I mean, those journals have been laid there in the archives for 150 years, something like that, and nobody's really given them a thought, you know. So who else would have done it? I wonder. It tend to be for my curiosity. Well, not my curiosity, my desire to write something about a local person. I mean, there were parts of her letters had been published in the Halifax Courier, the newspaper. But just the letters, and it would be about the politics of the town or something like that. Any comments she had to make, you know, or the social side. Her, you know, the people she went and had tea with and all. It was all very Jane Austen. I don't know whether you've read her stuff. But I say I always said it's like drinking champagne, reading Anne Lister. As opposed to something milder, reading Jane Austen.
Yeah. You could say that, yeah.
Yes. It's the real McCoy.
Yeah.
The real thing.
What are Helena's thoughts about her own work and the enormous, important effect it has had?
I feel that the benefit it's brought to the lesbian community is huge. Yes, I do, really.
Yeah.
I mean, if you could see the emails and the messages that I've had, hundreds of women all over the world, really. Yeah, mostly America. Apparently, as far as is known, it's the only frank document from a lesbian. It's been written in such detail, you know.
Yeah.
Yes, so they have a man called Richter Norton. Have you read his stuff? He called her the first modern lesbian because she was the first lesbian to write about her intimate life. And I know we shouldn't always be looking. I mean, being a lesbian doesn't define her as a life.
No.
You know, she was a really successful businesswoman and climbed mountains, travelled, you know, developed the estate, but it's the uniqueness, really, of what she put in the passages in a journal that has made us stand out in a way. Well, in a lot of ways, yeah. So
you worked so long on the life and times of Anne Lister and learned so much about her. Is there one thing you've learned from her life that you see comparisons to your own life?
Well, I think a lot of the main thing about her was her courage.
Yeah.
Take courage in who you are, what you are, and be frank and open. And not that she was very frank and open because she put it all in code, but these days that wouldn't be necessary to use a code. Although obviously we don't write about our intimate sexual lives like that. No. But I think it was the courage with which she faced society. Didn't compromise. She always wore black. She always had a woman companion. She wrote in her journals that I love and only love the fairer sex, and thus be loved by those in turn. My heart revolts from any other love than theirs. And that was her lesbian mantra, and she never deviated from it. And people have to be brave and have to come out and face the world, obviously, and why not? Yes. Yeah. Yes. I would say courage. Yeah. He used to say things like, I rise above it. If she'd been snubbed, or I rise above it. Or she would say, no mere mortal can offend my soul. You know, she was really tough. She was tough. Yeah. I think that's the lesson we can all take from her.
You are listening to Portrettpodden with your host, Mats Larsjärnås. Towards the end of Anne Lister's life, her and Anne Walker travel to Northern Europe. The plan is to go to Russia, but before they get that far, they travel to Norway. In this section of this podcast, I've interviewed Norwegian artist Henrietta Stensland. This interview, originally in Norwegian, has been translated into English for the purpose of this podcast.
Det er jo latin, dette fabelen.
It's Latin, of course. So Anne Lister would know exactly what we were talking about, this de te fabula narrator. But I can translate it for you. It means, of you the story is told, or this story applies to you. Henrietta Stensland is a Norwegian artist, currently working on an exhibit about Anne Lister's travels through Norway in 1839.
Utstillingen vi lager på Historisk museum
So, the exhibition we are producing at the Museum of Cultural History in Oslo is an exhibition where we have invited different contemporary artists to tell stories about real and fictional people with a life story important to tell. What we want to achieve with this exhibition is that all stories told could apply to you as an audience member. Så det så uavhengig av Pride, eller var det den sammenhengen som gjorde? The choice of title come from a reflection upon Pride Month now being celebrated in Europe, or did it have some other connotation to it?
Det var uavhengig av Pride, at den titelen satt vi for over 2 år siden.
The title came around 2 years ago. Maria Synde, who is one of the artists in the exhibition, has worked on Ole Trollmyr as a subject, a work that has taken many years. Trollmyr had a huge villa at Holmenkollen in Oslo, and painted on one of his cellar doors was a Pegasus with a boy astride riding him. Above it written the words De te fabula narrator. Ole Trollmyr was a gay man living openly in Norway in the 1920s. Du tar da hovedsakelig for deg en liste. Vi skal komme litt nærmere inn på ditt. If we may, let us dive deeper into your work now. What is it about Anne Lister that inspires you as an artist?
Hun som person fascinerer meg.
As a person fascinates me greatly. The stories about her story. The fact that we are able to dive deep into her diaries and writing. It's possible I'd like her in real life too. Who knows? Interpretation of text always paints different pictures of the people writing. What I like most about her is that she is so informative about what a woman at that time was able to achieve. Girls weren't given proper education, so she was self-taught. She traveled all the way to France to educate herself. Her thirst for knowledge and her drive is truly fascinating. And so clearly gay. She's a new lesbian role model. There were older gay men who probably were more present, like Oscar Wilde, one could draw comparisons to, yet we haven't had a distinct woman to latch onto, to draw parallels from her to us. I recognize a lot of Anne Lister's life in my own as a lesbian woman. A lot of thoughts about women marrying men. It happens today too. I came out in the late 80s, and it still wasn't as easy to be a lesbian. Skal jeg ikke nødvendigvis tvinge deg til å prate så veldig mye om ditt eget privatliv. Det skal du få lov. I won't go too far into your personal life. I'll let you keep that to yourself. But as a lesbian woman working on a creative piece about another important lesbian woman, do you find yourself being more personal in this work than you would in another context where you didn't have that connection, as you say?
Ja, jeg gjør nok antageligvis det, fordi jeg vil vite mer.
Because I want to know more about what her life was like then. Everything she tells us about her political life and culture and music, but she's also blatantly honest concerning the details of her sexual life. The way it's written, it's almost without emotion, so technical. That's what we are presented. It's entertaining. It's a great story, a positive story. You get the sense that people around Anne might have had a few problems, but she keeps on walking, head held high. She's strong.
Vinklingen til denne utstillingen var jo at det mye å ta tak I Anne Listers historie. Man kunne tatt mange detaljer, men så valgte jeg da.
The initial gist of this exhibition was that there's so much to Anne's story. I chose to focus on her trip to Norway. It was just a choice. Maybe because it was a difficult choice. No one has talked about this subject before. Yvonne Haugen is also very knowledgeable about Lister in Norway, so we worked a bit together on this, trying to figure out the best way to go about this. I needed the text and I tried transcribing it myself, but I don't have any experience about Anne's handwriting, so I got help from roughly 10 Lister experts to transcribe the sections regarding the 18 days she and Anne Walker stayed in Norway. Throughout the process of working with this material, I settled on that I would make a voice-over movie, where the text is read, so it would be easier for the audience to understand it. And so, Martine Nest Johansen was brought on board to be the voice of Anne Lister.
Wednesday, July 31st. Fair but dull. Fahrenheit 67.5 at 8 a.m. Breakfast at 8:40 to 9:15. Waited for carriage. Out at 9:55 to the castle. Sent back our new guide at 10:15, who brought the carriage at 10:30. Fine view from the castle of town and fjord. Took the carriage up the hill, the road we came to see the view. 4 shillings paid the woman at the house, where we elated on coming away at 11:30. At the new palace at 12:10. Hexer-style portico and hall opening on the top of its 20 times 15 yards. Handsome room at the back of the staircase, columned. A Saxon at work at the Scagliola pilasters, ceilings boards, and 2 layers crossing each other, of reeds, put on with wire, floorboards 1.5 inch thick battens. Gave at the palace gate 4 shillings. Came away at 1:20 at the Botanic Garden at 1:40. Anne and I had coffee at 10. Fine day, but heavy showers at 3:45 for 20 minutes.
Da har vi, hun veldig god på de norske uttalelsene av ordene. Jeg håper Anne Lister også.
Well, she's got the Norwegian pronunciation down, of course. It's better to listen to the text and reading it, as opposed to just having the text in front of you. And as a further element, I wanted to bring illustrations into it. I found sketches done by artists traveling through Norway in Lister's time, so 1830s, 1840s, that will illustrate the sound and text in this movie. Lister tells us listeners about what it was like in Norway. You get a small history class from Anne Lister when she visits us.
Friday, August 2nd. Fine but dullish. Fahrenheit 66.5 at 9 a.m. Breakfast over in half an hour, 10:50. Writing to Lady Stuart de Rothesay till out at 11. At the Musée des Northern Antiques from 11:10 to 12:55, home at 1. The museum is small, but the professor of history and antiquities himself showed us the things and was very civil and spoke so well and slowly I understood 1/4 of what he said by means of a few words of Latin now and then.
What's the most important to Lister during her stay? Is anything different?
Jeg vet ikke om hun opplever ting som annerledes noen gang. Jeg tror hun veldig opptatt av det hun ser I nuet.
I don't know if she sees it as different in any sense. She's busy being present in the moment and absorbing all the impulses. It's like she's downloading the information. She doesn't reflect too much. Trees are important to her, how they're different from the trees back home. She visits the botanical gardens and recalls all the Latin names of the various plants. She's gaining knowledge about Norway, whilst in Norway. She's interested in visiting the classical tourist destinations. Looking for the best lookout spots and mountains. She aims to get to Bolkesjø to see the mountain Gaustatoppen.
Gausta not visible all day. Fair since noon and even fine from about 2 p.m, but still Gausta is hid in clouds and mist. Determined that dinner to stay here till 3 a.m. tomorrow and then go to the mountains, or home again according to the weather, having sent a forbud towards the mountains. For if we do not go, we have only half to pay for the 3 horses for ourselves and 1 for the forbud. This now 6:45, just as I have written so far, sat inking over Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday last, till now 8:45. Rainy day till afterwards, fair and fine evening.
På veien dit så opplever hun hele tiden. Hun forklarer hele tiden hvor hun og hvordan det ser ut der.
On the way there, she explains what she sees and how things are here, how the people around her are. She has a Norwegian guide with her. She describes her interaction with him and his family. She's obviously concerned about the people around her. She tells us that we Norwegians drink a lot. That hasn't changed much. She also observes what Anne Walker does. We get a sense that Anne Walker is present and drawing the beautiful surroundings. It would be great to somehow get a hold of those drawings. I don't know how far along we are in that process.
Dette her jo en del av en reise som skulle ta 2 år, og målet
It's part of a journey that will
over
last
Russland.
2 years, with the final destination being Russia. They were probably supposed to stay longer in Norway. I was told by one of the guys at Shibden Hall when I went to visit that the timber used to build the hall supposedly came from Bergen in Norway. Lista is a savvy businesswoman, so maybe she's interested in knowing more about where her raw materials came from, to see it for herself. She places an ad in the local newspaper asking for a guide willing to take them further north. But because of the extremely poor weather, they are forced to travel back home earlier than expected. They do intend to visit Norway again, but not before next year, as she says.
Jeg kaller meg jo sånn hobby-serendipity-forsker.
I'm sort of a serendipity researcher. You go deep into the matter and you keep discovering new things. I, for example, read that she visited the Museum of History, the same location where this exhibit will take place, in Oslo, or Christiania, as it was known then. It's exciting. She mentions coming across an intriguing Icelandic calendar, a sort of formula precisely dating from the 1700s to 2050, which day Easter Monday would be each year. And that is a very specific analyst thing to be interested in. And that is something the audience will be able to take a look at. Experiencing the historic Norway through Annelise's eyes is very interesting, but I also have a tactile document to build upon that experience. She once placed a piece in the paper column for anyone who might have found her missing ring, her uncle's mourning ring. She goes to the police. She even offers a 5 specie reward for anyone finding it, which was a lot of money at that time.
Wednesday, August 7th. Found on going to bed last night that I had lost my pincushion with the mourning ring from my uncle pinned on it. Think to go back to Drammen for it. Fine but dullish morning, Fahrenheit 68 degrees.
Fick det aldrig möjlighet att komma tillbaka till... With the exhibit being in the Museum of Cultural History, and with Lista sadly never being able to return to Norway, do you get the sense that Lista has now come back?
Det. Hun kommer her, jeg føler egentlig at hun her for første gang. Men,
oh, absolutely. Now others can take part in the joy that I've had. You're proud. She's been here. And that's the beauty of the amount of detail in her diaries. People can recognize the places she mentions and trace her steps in a way. Oh, I'm from Gjellebekk or Drammen. That's my hometown. She's been there. Maybe she was standing right here. That, to me, is important.
En ting I forbindelse med det, så vil jeg tro at hvis hun...
I also think that if she hadn't died in 1840, we would maybe never have had the diaries. The photograph came in 40 or 41, and all of a sudden there was a whole new way to document important events. It's possible that she would have destroyed the diaries had she lived longer. Hva ønsker du at publikum skal sitte igjen med når de har sett hele verket, og hva... What do you hope audiences are left with, and what can Annelise tell us about how we live our lives today?
Jeg håper jo at dette kan vekke litt mer nysgjerrighet rundt Annelise.
I hope we can get people curious about it, that they found the movie and the story entertaining. We have no coded sections included, but hopefully they will be curious to find out more about Anne and her writing. while not necessarily to me, I know Anne Lister's stories have been important to a lot of people in order to help them to be themselves, to be proud to be lesbian, proud to be gay. We haven't had that sort of tangible connection before. I hope many are able to find that through this story. I'm not working towards it, but I hope that will be one of the long-term effects of it. The main aim of this exhibit is to show that all stories can apply to you, and I hope that Anne Lister's story can add to that.
Så for de som ikke så heldige at...
For those not able to watch this movie at the exhibit, will it be possible to find it somewhere else in the future?
Det har jeg jo egentlig tenkt litt på. Jeg ønsker jo å få den I første runde til bursdagsfeiringen.
I'm hoping to submit it to the Anne Lister birthday celebration in 2022. I haven't contacted them yet, as the film is yet to be finished. After that, there is only the matter of copyright before it can be put online. And for those that have the opportunity and with COVID restrictions allowing, you're welcome to enjoy this exhibit from the 18th of June at the Museum of Cultural History in Oslo. So, what is the legacy of Anne Lister? While traveling to Georgia with Anne Walker, she caught a fever which ended up costing her her life, dying on the 22nd of September 1840, only 49 years old. It is important to note that one's sexuality does not define a person, yet her challenging of social and gender norms, and her vast journal detailing not only her lesbianism, but everyday life in Yorkshire, is an amazing inheritance she's given us. Who knows what could have happened if she were able to be open in her own time? How would history have remembered her then? And does the fact that such a big and important part of her life was hidden behind this intricate code make her more intriguing and interesting? If there is anything we can conclude, it is that the life of Anne Lister has had a great impact on generations of lesbians, gays, to anyone feeling like an outsider looking in. While writing these lasting words, could you imagine how important they would become? One thing is for certain, we are luckier to have them. We are lucky to have women like Helena Whitbread, who broke the code and brought this important part of Lister's life to the collective consciousness. We are lucky to have women like Angela Clare, whose caring work makes sure that further generations, literally, are able to walk in Lister's footsteps at Shipton Hall. We are lucky to have women like Henrietta Stensland, who brings an interesting new aspect to Lister's travels and brings her closer to us, here in Norway. We are lucky to have women like Sally Wainwright and Suran Jones, who through Gentleman Jack brings Anne Lister to millions of new eyes and ears and make sure that this amazing woman is never forgotten. So, if Anne Lister was still with us today, what would they tell her?
It's more that I would like to tell her what she's done for people, I suppose. That sounds like it's kind of the reversal. So, yeah, there'd be loads. I'd have a billion questions for her. But I think I would want her to know what she means to people today. I think it would be important to let her know that what she's actually created, which is kind of like a safe space for people to come out and, you know, shout about somebody. You know, she's a lesbian icon, and that's just amazing. I mean, we've got a lot now, modern day, surviving, and over the last sort of century or so. But from history, we just don't have trailblazing lesbian icons, and there she is. And so, yeah, she's kind of, hopefully she'd like that.
I asked her one question. What would that question be? Can you forgive me?
Lister har ikke vært med en gang, og jeg veldig opptatt av det. Spurt 2 uker med meg I Japan, ville være med.
I know that Lister loved to travel, so I'd bring her with me to Japan. I'm sure she'd love it. You've been listening to an episode of Portrettpodden, a podcast with me, Mats Lasse-Jangås, and the theme of this episode was the real Gentleman Jack, Anne Lister. The voice of Anne Lister during this episode was performed by Martina Næss Johansen. My thanks goes to her, to Angela Clare, to Helena Whitbread, and to Henrietta Stensland for taking the time to be a part of this episode. My thanks to all of you who've been listening. Portrettpodden works in accordance with the ethical code of practice for Norwegian press. If you want to support Portrettpodden, you can subscribe wherever you listen to podcast. Find Portrettpodden on Facebook and Instagram, and support Portrettpodden at buymeacoffee.com. Thank you for listening.